we have a good turnout already, and this is just to ensure that you know it's 12:06 at the moment, and we want to be able to give enough time for the presentations and for the discussions. So just allow me to speak in Arabic while I welcome everybody to this meeting. السلام عليكم أكيد جميعا. اسمي عطاف شحادي وأنا مسؤولة البرامج النظم الإيكولوجية الصحية والإنتاجية في مكتب غرب آسيا لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة. أكيد بحب أول شيء بالإطالة عن نفسي وبالنيابة عن سيد سامي دماسي المدير والممثل الإقليمي لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة مكتب غرب آسيا. أود أن أرحب بكم جميعا، شاكرة تلبيتكم أكيد للدعوة للمشاركة بهذا الاجتماع الهام والذي يأتي ضمن سلسلة اجتماعات تحضيرية للفريق العامل الدائم العضوية بشأن الإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي لما بعد عام 2020. متمني لكم أكيد التوفيق وأنتم تكونوا جميعا بصحة وعافية. قد حدد مؤتمر الأطراف عملية إعداد الإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي لما بعد 2020، ودعت هذه العملية إلى إجراء مشاورات بما في ذلك على سبيل المثال لا الحصر منتديات النقاش الافتراضية وحلقات العمل العالمية والإقليمية والمواضيعية. وفي نفس المقرر حث المؤتمر الأطراف على المشاركة والمساهمة بفعالية في عملية إعداد إطار عالمي قوي للتنوع البيولوجي لما بعد عام 2020 من أجل تعزيز الملكية القوية للإطار اللي يتفق عليه والدعم القوي لتنفيذه فوراً. ودعا الحكومات الأخرى وأصحاب المصلحة الآخرين إلى القيام بذلك. وبهذا الشأن أجرت أمانة اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي عدة عمليات تشاورية بالتعاون مع شركاء مختلفين، ونتجت عن عمليات التشاور التي أجريت حتى الآن من الحصول على دعم العديد من الأطراف والمنظمات ووضع المسودة الأولى للإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي للفترة ما بين 2021 و 2030. سيدات السادة الأفاضل، أكيد اليوم إحنا رح يستعرض الاجتماع ال15 لمؤتمر الأطراف في اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي إنجاز وتنفيذ خطة اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي الاستراتيجية اللي مضت بشأن التنوع البيولوجي للفترة من 2011 ل 2020. ومن المتوقع أيضا أنه يتخذ في قرار نهائي بشأن الإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي لما بعد 2020، إلى جانب اتخاذ قرارات بشأن مواضيع ذات الصلة بما في ذلك بناء القدرات وتعبئة الموارد. الأهداف الرئيسية اليوم من اجتماعنا اليوم رح يتمحور على عرض لمحة عامة عن نتائج اجتماعات الهيئة الفرعية السبستا 24 والهيئة الفرعية للتنفيذ SBI-3 اللي أكيد كثير منكم شارك فيهم، وتعزيز مفاهيم عناصر المسودة للإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي لفترة 2021 و 2030، ودعم الشبكة الإقليمية لنقاط الاتصال الخاصة باتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي والهيئة الفرعية للمشورة العلمية والتقنية والتكنولوجية والهيئة الفرعية للتنفيذ تحضيرا للاجتماع الثالث للفريق العامل المفتوح للعضوية بشأن الجلوبال Biodiversity Framework اللي راح يصير تقريبا الأسبوع الجاي إن شاء الله أو نهاية هاي الشهر. وأخيرا تعزيز الاستعدادات الإقليمية بشكل أفضل لمؤتمر الأطراف ال15 القادم لاتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي بمدخلات من الأطراف وأصحاب المصلحة الآخرين حسب ما يقتضيه الأمر. نؤكد أن مداخلاتكم ومساهماتكم اليوم اللي نطمح إلها رح تعزز وتساهم بتقوية فرصة مشاركة أصحاب المصلحة بمنطقة غرب آسيا في مثل هذه الفعاليات وتدعم القضايا اللي إلها الشأن والمشاركة في الاتفاقيات البيئية المتعددة الأطراف. ختاما بتقدم لكم بالشكر الجزيل ونرجو لكم النجاح وتحقيق الأهداف المتوقعة من هذه الاجتماع. أكيد معنا اليوم كمان على الخط أحب أعرف على زميلي مستر ماي كوليج بالا كريشنا بيسوفاتي اللي هو كمان من برنامج الأمم المتحدة للبيئة، وراح أعطيه فرصة اللي هو يعرف عن نفسه. قبل ما أعطيه أنا المجال بس حبيت أخبركم إنه راح يتم تسجيل هذه الاجتماع اليوم، وأكيد إحنا حاضرين لأي أسئلة أو أي استفسارات لإلكم. فعشان ما أطول عليكم أكثر، Bala, I'm giving you the floor to introduce yourself please to the colleagues that are with us today. Just to let you know, we have a participation from 11 of the 12 countries that are with us in West Asia. A lot of them are, we've got the CBD focal points, but also directors of the biodiversity departments and divisions within their ministries as well. So with this, I pass it on over to you to introduce yourself, and hopefully we can start the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Very good afternoon, distinguished participants, the National Focal Points to the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD COP Bureau member from Kuwait, Ms. Lena Al-Awadi, my friend and colleague from the CBD Secretariat, Ms. Jyoti Mato Philip, representatives from various organizations in the region, colleagues from UNEP Regional Office, Ita Chehadi and Avatif Abdullah, my colleagues from UNEP, helping put this particular event together. Very, very good afternoon to all of you. And what I was able to gather from Itaf's introduction, based on a few words like SBSTTA and SBI, was that we are here to actually look at the outcomes of the subsidiary bodies meetings, one focusing on the scientific technological aspects, the SBSTTA-24, and the second subsidiary body looking at implementation, the third meeting of it, which I'm sure many of you would have participated between May and June this year. That led to the drafting of the first draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which I'm sure you would have already received it and never gone through it, which is going to be the basis for our discussions at the third open-ended working group that is to begin on the 23rd of August and will run up to 3rd of September, which will focus on the draft elements of the framework that looks at targets, that also looks at implementation aspects of it. My name is Balakrishna Pisupati. I work at the United Nations Environment Program based in Nairobi, where I am with the International Environmental Governance Program. And one of my responsibilities is to manage a multi-year, multi-regional program covering Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, in support of a number of multilateral environmental agreements that belong to the biodiversity cluster, the chemicals waste cluster, on issues of ocean governance, and also issues on mainstreaming agriculture. So we've been actually organizing a series of these briefing sessions in preparation for the informal meeting of the SBSTTA and the SBI meetings during February and March, but we also supported countries in preparation for the SBSTTA-24 and SBI-3 meetings. So it was in that time, colleagues from the West Asia office, many of you are aware, requested the possibility of organizing this briefing session for colleagues and the focal points from the West Asia region. And I'm so honored and happy to know that we have 11 of the 12 countries from the region who are a part of this briefing. That not only shows the interest of the countries in discussing issues that are not just common for the national priorities, but also for the region as well. So in that regard, from UNEP, I'm very grateful for your time and participation. And certainly this briefing session is a beginning of a journey which, as you know, many of us would be undertaking in the weeks and months to come. We will have the working group meeting convening in a couple of weeks, and then we are expecting to have an in-person meeting of the SBSTTA, SBI, and the working group meetings sometime early next year, where we are expected to continue the discussions in terms of providing some concrete recommendations to the CBD COP15 meeting, which, as you know, a part of it through a virtual session will be held in October, and a more formal session will be held as the second part of the CBD 15. I have my colleague from the CBD Secretariat who will be briefing you about some of those aspects in terms of the elements of SBSTTA and what is expected from the Working Group 3 meeting. And during this particular briefing, we will have two sessions, one that focuses on the outcomes of SBSTTA and the SBI meetings, and the second one that focuses on a quick reflection of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the targets, the indicators, and aspects related to that, followed by a discussion. So with that, I'll hand it over back to my colleague Ita from the West Asia office to take this particular meeting forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much بالا. أكيد إحنا للأسف يعني كنا عم نحاول إنه نعمل اجتماع باللغة العربية والإنجليزية يكون بنفس الوقت، ولكن للأسف لم يتسنى لنا إنه نقدر نعملها، ولكن أكيد إحنا حاضرين إذا في أسئلة. مثل ما الكل بيعرف استعمال إحنا عم نستعمل تيمز. إذا تطلعوا على فوق أكيد في الميكروفون في الريز هاند أوبشن. أتوقع يعني بعد كل هالفترة مع البانديميك مع الجائحة كلنا يمكن تعودنا وتعلمنا كيف نستخدم التيمز بورتل، ولكن بس للي ما بيعرف في عنا حد في يد وعليها وجه صغير مبتسم، فيكم ترفعوا اليد إذا عندكم أي أسئلة أو أي مداخلات. واكيد في التشات اوبشن اذا اي حدا حابب انه يكتب ملاحظته واحنا فينا ناخذها اكيد بالعربي وبالانجليزي، اتس نوت بروبلم، ونقدر نمشي ان شاء الله. استاذ قتيبة انت رافع ايدك، ما بعرف اذا هاي اصلا ولا عندك مداخله او
لا صحيح. نعم انا رفعت ايدي وانا اشكرك جدا، وحقيقه اشكر ايضا زميلنا الدكتور بالا كريشنا وجميع الاخوان الحضور الكرام. وانا طبعا كنت من زمان مع السي بي دي كممثل المناطق المحميه لما كنت على مدى 3 قرون يعني مو كبير بالعمر انا، لكن في الحياه الفطريه ممثل بروتكتد ارياز. والان نحن في وزاره البيئه في يعني وكاله البيئه. حقيقه انا يعني شرفني احضر هذا الاجتماع، وما كان يعني لي شرف حضور الاجتماعات الثلاث السابقه، لكن بالنسبه للبند اللي هو يعني يعزز الاستعدادات الاقليميه للمشاركه بمؤتمر الاطراف ال15، فاكيد هناك مواضيع مثاره او تحت النقاش. انا ما عندي حصر له ولا اطلاع، لكن بدي اذا كان لم تضاف بعض المواضيع الهامه الاستراتيجيه فبدي اضيفها، اللي من ضمنها اولا يعني كما تعلمون ظاهره حرائق الغابات المنتشره في العالم بشكل يعني غير طبيعي، سواء يعني غير طبيعي كنيتشر او غير طبيعي بشكل يعني ريزن اسباب. هذه يمكن لان جدا مهمه هي في موضوع تاثيرها على البايوديفرسيتي وعلى السوشيال ايكونوميك يعني امباكت، وعلى كل سلسله الحياه الفطريه وال يعني السياحه البيئيه، على يعني اشياء كثيره. هذه يعني حرائق الغابات يعني جريمه متعدده التاثيرات السلبيه. فانا اعتقد اذا ما يعني ادرج هذا الموضوع فضروري جدا ان يدرج كبند من البنود اللي تناقش في المؤتمر القادم. علاوه على عندي اقتراح ايضا قديم حديث، اللي هو كما تعلمون لدينا في البايوديفرسيتي في جميع الدول يعني الريد ليست بالنسبه للانديجر سبيشيز والرير سبيشيز. فانا بدي ان يكون عندنا مثلا تحرك لهذا الجانب على المستوى الوطني، بحيث يعني ما نعتمد فقط على على الليست الموجوده في الكتب التي يعني بنيت من فتره طويله على اكيد دراسات وابحاث، ولكن يبغى لها ايضا تجديد وتحديث هذه الريد ليست. والتجديد ما يجي في المكاتب، ولكن يجي على برامج ميدانيه علميه وفرق مستمره تشوف الانديجر سبيشيز صار يعني كويس او صارت اعداد تحولت الى انديجر او هكذا. فهذا امرين بدي اطرحهم عليكم، الله يحفظك وشكرا جزيلا.
ان شاء الله. الله يخليك، شكرا دكتور قتيبة عن جد على مداخلتك. ولكن ان شاء الله احنا بدنا حابين بس انه عندنا اكيد وقت محدد للاجتماع، فاحنا حابين انه نعرض لكم البرزنتيشنز اللي حتصير اليوم، واكيد احنا خلينا مجال في نهايه الاجتماع لحتى ناخذ كمان هاي القضايا اللي هي بتخص منطقتنا بالذات. وهي النقطتين اكيد انا كتبتهم ودرجتهم، وان شاء الله بس ينفتح النقاش ان شاء الله فيك كمان ترجع تخبرنا، واكيد رح يتم مناقشتهم. فبتشكرك على مداخلتك.
ألف شكر.
تسلم. فهلا بننتقل للجلسه الاولى اللي هي حتكون تحديثات نتائج الجلوبال بايودايفرستي فريم ورك اللي ما بعد 2020 والسبستا والاس بي اي. فرح يعرض علينا اكيد بالا وزميلتنا جويتي اللي معنا من السكرتارية السي بي دي. I think Joyty you will present first before Bala, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
So راح تعرض علينا جويتي الملخص لهاي الاجتماعات اللي صارت والابديت، ومن بعدها راح يتم عرض برزنتيشن من بالا بخصوص الاوبن وركينج جروبس meetings اللي صارت. So Joyti, over to you. You can take the floor and present.
Thank you very much. Let me just see if I manage to get my presentation. There we go.
Yeah, you're there.
You got it?
Yes, yes, very clear.
Okay.
If you can click on the first slide. Yes, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, first of all, thank you very, very much for inviting the CBD Secretariat to participate in this regional briefing, both to UNEP and also I would like to thank every one of you participants from the focal points as well as from the departments for attending this meeting. It makes us feel really good that there is so much interest in this topic. So thank you very much. I just will give you a little bit of a briefing on SBSTTA-24 and SBI-3, what has happened so far, and then a little bit of our expectations for the working group that starts actually in 1 week, next week on 23rd of August. So SBSTTA-24 met virtually from 3rd of May to 9th of June this year. There were over 1,400 registered participants, which is one of the most to date. And that is a trend that we are noticing in our meetings, that a lot more countries and participants are joining because they don't have to travel. So a lot of people who would otherwise not have managed to come to the meetings are able to come to the meetings now. And in fact, some of our colleagues have told us from different countries that they're using these virtual briefings also as capacity building for the young negotiators that will take over from all of us in a few years. We had 127 parties and over 200 CSOs and stakeholders registered and participating. We had 9 plenary sessions, which were interspersed with contact groups for more detailed negotiation. Everything was built on the virtual sessions that took place for SBSTTA-24 in Feb this year. So we encouraged, or rather the chair of SBSTTA and SBI encouraged parties not to repeat what they had already said during the informal sessions. So we really built on this, and some of the agenda items are directly related to post-2020. As some of you might know, COP14 requested SBSTTA and SBI to provide guidance to the chairs of the open-ended working group in order for them to develop the drafts of the biodiversity framework. So there were six items and draft recommendations for COP, which were approved by SBSTTA-24, and they became L documents. These were on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, scientific and technical matters, review of the updated goals and targets and related indicators and baselines, the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook, synthetic biology, agriculture and biodiversity, risk assessment of GMOs, and the work on ICBEST, their program of work. Some of these draft recommendations still have bracketed text. However, as Bala indicated, we will be having a meeting sometime next year, a physical meeting, hopefully, sometime next year that will finalize the recommendations to COP, and hopefully then all the brackets will be removed. 3 issues will be taken up further as CRP documents, and they will be taken up at the resumed physical session: marine and coastal biodiversity, invasive alien species, and health and biodiversity. In fact, health and biodiversity will start with a contact group when we're at the resumed session of SBSTTA-24. As I said, the recommendations, since our bureau decided, and the SBSTTA bureau decided that no decisions will be taken by online meetings, the formal recommendations will be adopted at an in-person meeting next year, which we hope will take place back-to-back with the open-ended working group and SBI-3. So now we can move on to SBI-3, which I know a little bit more since I am the secretary for this meeting. We met virtually from 16th of May to 13th of June. We had over 1,000 registered participants, again, a huge number from SBI-2, which was about 360 participants, and SBI-1 was much less than that. We had 116 parties participating and 160 CSOs and other stakeholders. We had 9 plenary sessions, which were interspersed with many contact groups. I think maybe we overdid it with contact groups, but we had many sessions of contact groups. And we also built on the informal sessions of SBI-3 in March, as well as a special virtual session on biodiversity, One Health, and COVID-19, which took place in December 2020. And if some of you may recall, we had our first set of meetings last year in September, where we also looked at resource mobilization, a briefing from the expert panel, plus we looked at the monitoring review and reporting agenda item in September. So the formal sessions were built on all the things that had happened in the previous 9 months. SBI had a lot of documents. We had 17 draft CRPs. Only 4 CRPs were approved by the meeting. A lot of them were in brackets, and several of the draft recommendations included advice on key elements for the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And I can assure you that even though these were not approved by a formal session of the SBI, the co-chairs did look at all of these draft recommendations that then went into developing the first draft of the biodiversity framework. Most of them were related to implementation support mechanisms, so resource mobilization, capacity building, coherence and coordination towards enabling conditions, responsibility and transparency, and outreach and awareness. As I said, several of the draft recommendations are still bracketed, and all the draft recommendations related to post-2020 were bracketed at the request of parties, and it is the intention of the parties to adopt all at the same time. So all the decisions, once we meet online not online, physically, to then adopt all of these together at the resumed session, which hopefully will take place sometime next year, back-to-back with SBSTTA-24 and Working Group 2020, the second part of the third meeting. Delegates also reviewed progress on the implementation of the convention's protocols and the working group on Article 8J and related provisions related to traditional knowledge. So now, Working Group 2020, the third meeting, it starts next week on August 23rd. And it will go on till 3rd of September. I know that the World Conservation Congress starts on 3rd of September, so it will be a challenge for some people to be in both places on that one day, but hopefully we will be able to manage it. The parties and stakeholders will discuss the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which was published on 12th of July and is available on our website. I hope all of you have had a chance to look at it. This was developed by the working group co-chairs with support from the Secretariat. It builds on the zero draft and the updated zero draft, as well as the discussions at Working Group 2 at the meeting in Rome that took place last year, which was the last time when we were all together. It also takes into account the inputs from SBSTTA 24 and SBI-3 on post-2020, and as well as, and this is really great because we've had such a huge interest on post-2020 that we had over 2,000 individual suggestions from parties and stakeholders during SBSTTA and 24 and SBI-3. Plus we have, and if you go to the website, you will see the post-2020 website. We have immense number of submissions from parties and stakeholders, and they are still coming for the open-ended working group for the first draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The framework is supported, and these documents are also available online with a glossary of terms, what the co-chairs and the Secretariat meant by certain terms that are used in the first draft, plus with a monitoring framework, with headline indicators, and also with one-pagers explaining each of the goals and targets with component indicators so that people can get an idea on the breadth of each goal and target. So in addition to this document, the meeting will also discuss the draft elements of a decision for adoption of the new framework, which is annexed to the first draft. As you know, when the parties adopt at COP15 the framework, it will be adopted through a decision. And so we will, we hope that parties will be able to have a first reading on the draft elements of a decision during the meeting that starts next week. We also will have a document on digital sequence information on genetic resources. This is also available online now, and we will have a first reading and at least 3 contact groups for this meeting. So we learned a lot during the last year of virtual meetings, both formal and informal, and all of these we have hopefully applied to make the experience of the Working Group 3 much better. So learning and listening to parties and stakeholders and learning from the UNFCCC Secretariat and their meetings, which were also held in June of this year. We are now providing assistance to support online participation, and a notification to that effect had been sent earlier this in the summer. And I think 26th of July was the deadline, and by then we had actually received 40 from 40 countries their request for support, online support. We have also chosen the timing and the modalities of the session very carefully, listening and learning from the experiences of SBI and SBSTTA. However, we are very aware of the fact that some countries will feel more pressure with the time than other countries. However, the Bureau decided that during that time when most countries are online, we, when it's their daytime, that we should have most of the sessions during that time. And we recognize, and the Bureau recognizes, that East Asia and the Pacific are going to be impacted and affected by this decision. We also have decided not to have any sessions during the weekend, as we recognize that a number of people go to the office to use the internet there because it's more stable, and therefore, and it's more difficult to go during the weekend. So we are going to have no meetings during the weekend. And we've also recognized that there is a need for in-person meetings to conclude the substantive agenda items and approve the final draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And so, as I said, we will have these meetings back-to-back with SBSTTA and SBI sometime next year to complete the work. There is a scenario note with organization of work, which is available online. And actually, since last night, there is a Rev 2, which has much more detailed information on the organization of work. Finally, further information on all of these documents can be accessed through the post-2020 website. And hopefully all of you know where to go and get it. As usual, we will have a schedule through the app and through the website. We will have a schedule available, and you can, and the link to each meeting will go live through this schedule, so you will never have to scramble in your emails to find the links. You should also get, as viewers and speakers, the link to the interactive platform. To date, we have 812 participants who have pre-registered, 59 parties and 94 observer organizations. If you have not registered as yet, we sincerely hope that you will register soon to secure your delegation's participation. It is a little bit more complicated nowadays because we need to provide you with links to join the platform, and since that is to a third party, it takes a little bit longer for us to get all of that done. So I hope that you will do it. Thank you very much. I hope I was able to provide good information to you, and I hope to see you next week as we start the working group meetings. I am here for any more further questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. Again, just wanted to let everybody know إنه إحنا رح نشارككم the presentations اللي عرضناهم اليوم. So we will share the presentations with you all by email. And if you have any questions, of course, we are available. Just so that we can make up some time, Bala, I will pass it over to you to share the next presentation. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Ataf. Just to confirm that you're able to see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, colleagues. We will now get into some details, both in terms of the key outcomes of the SBSTTA-24 and the SBI-3 meetings. But also this presentation will provide you with a quick reflection of the elements of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the targets and the headline indicators that are a part of the documentation that will be open for discussion at the forthcoming virtual meeting of the Open Working Group starting on the 23rd of August. As I mentioned, the two meetings, SBSTTA-24 and SBI-3, did provide a significant amount of input into drafting the elements of the global biodiversity framework. And then I'm sure as the focal points and those interested in the convention, you would have followed the discussions of both SBSTTA and SBI very intently. So the next 3 or 4 slides is going to give you a very quick overview of the key discussions that happened on some of the agenda items, both of SBSTTA as well as of SBI-3. And this is to give you a bit of a perspective as and when we go into the discussion or into the presentation that details the biodiversity framework and the targets. And of course, as you would have imagined, certainly SBSTTA-24 did focus on the science and the related aspects of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And there was discussions in addition to others focus on monitoring framework that look at an ad hoc technical expert group, the use of United Nations system of environmental economic accounting, looking at the national systems to be prepared to deal with both adoption as soon as it is adopted, as getting the biodiversity framework and the elements of the targets included, a consolidation of activities, but also it did discuss a number of headline indicators as well. The second agenda item at SBSTTA, which did receive a lot of attention, and for those of you who follow this agenda item would realize that we've been discussing the issue of synthetic biology since 2018 under the convention. And certainly the discussions focused on consideration of this new branch of biotechnology, synthetic biology, as a new and emerging issue. And it also discussed broad and regular horizon scanning of the developments and a process for continuing to do the horizon scanning broadly and regularly. So the focus of the discussions on synthetic biology related to some of those elements. The SBSTTA also discussed issues of risk assessment and management of living modified organisms, where there were discussions about establishment of an ad hoc technical expert group on risk assessment, but also a discussion on the need to have an expert assessment on engineered gene drives. For the biosafety focal points, a very, very important agenda for consideration. SBSTTA also discussed issues of marine and coastal biodiversity, where the focus was on the strategic review and analysis of the program of work related to coastal and marine biodiversity. Discussions were also held on supporting issues that are related to marine litter and other related aspects, but also the need for modifying descriptions of ecologically or biologically sensitive areas. Many of you are familiar with some of these issues. So the discussions is more on how the descriptions of EBSAs or ecologically or biologically sensitive areas need to be modified. The focus on agriculture and biodiversity was more on the issue of soil biodiversity, where the discussions were on looking at the plan of action, the 2020 to 2030 plan of action for the international initiative for the conservation and sustainable use of soil biodiversity. SBSTTA also discussed invasive alien species related issues, where it focused on draft methods, tools, and strategies to manage to stop, to contain, and to eradicate invasive alien species. Biodiversity and health, a very topical issue for discussion because of the current situation globally of the pandemic. The discussions were on the draft action plan to look at biodiversity and health relationships, but also to look at the social and environmental dimensions of health. So some of these are the broad overarching elements that SBSTTA-24 discussed. Coming to the implementation subsidiary body, which is SBI-3, again, the focus was on how the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, once it is adopted, would be implemented. And in addition to a number of issues, the 3 points that are on the slide that focuses on gender action plan, having a communication strategy, and also detailing the implementation and capacity building plans received a lot of attention. And of course, as many of you would imagine, adopting the biodiversity framework is one element of it. Implementation is going to be starting immediately after that. And countries are very keenly looking at the aspect of resource mobilization and also how the financial mechanism, the Global Environment Facility, would be supporting effective implementation at different levels. The discussions on resource mobilization and financial mechanism focused on synergies in resource mobilization, how different aspects of resources that are available, that are going to be available, that needs to be found through innovative mechanisms and innovative ways, how countries and how parties could identify maximizing the use of every dollar that is available, but also finding the sources for increasing the availability of finances for implementation of the global biodiversity framework. There was also a focused discussion on the need for countries to come up with national finance plans on how much of resources are available, how much of resources would be required at the national level to effectively realize the global biodiversity framework and also implement the targets that would be adopted at COP15. Several participants raised the issue of the need for having a dedicated biodiversity fund on the lines of a climate fund to support implementation. And certainly this is one agenda item that will continue to receive attention when it comes to the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. A lot of discussions focused on issues of capacity building, technology transfer, cooperation, knowledge management, and communications. There was a lot of discussion in addition to some elements related to specific ecosystems like island ecosystems, modalities for capacity building, establishment of a knowledge center, and also having an informal advisory committee on communications. SBI also discussed a mechanism for reporting, assessment, and review implementation when the framework gets adopted, where countries identified the national biodiversity strategies and action plans as a key vehicle in terms of looking at not just reporting, but also for review, for monitoring, and also for assessment purposes. So a lot of countries are now beginning to think of how to make use of the available national biodiversity strategies and action plans so that they are better tuned and adapted to actually reflect the outcomes of COP15 that includes the biodiversity framework and also the related targets. Discussions also focused on dealing with national commitments, not only from the governments and ministries of environment and the parties to the convention, but also in terms of non-state actors and their commitments as well, like business sector, like NGOs, civil society organizations, academia, and all others as well. It also discussed on setting a set of timelines for reviewing the implementation starting from COP16 onwards. And certainly that will also receive a lot of attention as and when we move forward towards COP15. Two very specific agenda items SBI discussed in relation to the Cartagena Protocol on the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. One focused on an indicative criteria that needs to be put in place to look at specialized instruments for access and benefit sharing, and related to Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, establishment of an ad hoc technical expert group, and also the details that needs to be worked out with respect to options on how to manage and govern the global multilateral benefit sharing mechanisms. So those are some of the key outcomes of SBI-3 and SBSTTA-24. And now I'll move on to the second part of my presentation that will give you a quick overview of the current draft Global Biodiversity Framework, a very quick snapshot. I'm sure you already would have read and would have gone through the draft, but this is more a very quick overview of what the framework looks like and what the targets are. And of course, the document starts with the theory of change, where a set of preconditions are required to achieve the mission related to biodiversity, but also the 2050 vision of biodiversity through a number of actions that relate to finding tools and solutions that looks at reducing the threats to biodiversity and ecosystems, but also to ensure that biodiversity and ecosystems provide enough for the needs of people and societies. All of these actually are captured in a graphic, in a diagram that is a part of the draft biodiversity framework that looks at how the framework looks at elements of a number of goals and a number of milestones to support achieving those goals, supported by 21 targets that are going to be discussed at the working group meeting. I'll quickly mention what the goals and the targets are. Goal A looks at the integrity of all ecosystems that needs to be enhanced, but it also quantifies that at least by 15% in the area, in the connectivity and the integrity of natural ecosystems, and the rate of extinctions are reduced by tenfold from the current levels, and the risk of species extinction is halved, at least by 50% reduced, and at least 90% of the genetic diversity of all species are maintained. And there are three goals, milestones that are associated with this particular goal. One that looks at connectivity and integrity, the second one that looks at reducing the extinction risk, and the third one that looks at ensuring that 90% of genetic diversity is maintained within the ecosystems. Goal B focuses on the value and the contributions of nature to people, but requires that people's value, maintain and enhance biodiversity through conservation and sustainable use that actually support the overarching principles and elements of the Sustainable Development Goals. This particular goal is supported by two milestones. One that looks at countries consider and fully account and inform all relevant and public and private decisions that consider nature and its contribution to people. And secondly, the long-term sustainability of nature's contribution has to be appropriately identified as contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal C focuses on benefits arising from the utilization as well as because of conservation and sustainable use, where it clearly asks for fair and equitable sharing of benefits for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, supported by two milestones. One, the share of monetary benefits that are received by the providers, including the holders of traditional knowledge, is increased. And the second milestone that looks at non-monetary benefits, supporting participation of the indigenous local communities and people who are the holders of traditional knowledge in research and development, is increased. The last and the fourth goal, Goal B, focuses on financing, where it looks at bridging the gap in terms of the available and the required finances for implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework, and it has a longer horizon in terms of its timelines that it contributes to the 2050 vision of the CBD. The three milestones associated with this goal: one, to raise the required financial resources, where we are looking at a gap of at least $700 billion per year by 2030. Secondly, the second milestone looks at adequate means, including capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer to implement the framework are available as well as used or deployed. And lastly, it also prefers that adequate financial and other resources for the period beyond 2030, which is between 2030 and 2040, would need to be committed or provided by 2030. So certainly a very important goal there. And these are grouped under a number of broad categories. One that looks at reducing threats to biodiversity, 21 targets, as I mentioned. Target 1 looks at ensuring all land and sea areas are under integrated biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, addressing land and sea use changes. Target 2 focuses on ensuring at least 20% of degraded freshwater, marine and terrestrial ecosystems are under restoration. That ensures connectivity among them and focusing on priority ecosystems. Target 3 looks at ensuring at least 30% of land areas and sea areas are conserved, as well as well-connected ecosystems are protected, not only by designating protected areas, but also other effective area-based conservation measures. Target 4 looks at ensuring active management of actions to enable the recovery of species as well as conservation of species and genetic diversity, and also to reduce human-wildlife conflict. Target 5 looks at harvesting, trade, and use of wild species is sustainable, it is legal, and it is also safe for human health. Target 6 looks at the issue of invasive alien species that calls for at least 50% in the reduction in the rate of introduction and establishment of invasive alien species, in addition to focusing on controlling and eradication of invasive alien species. Target 7 focuses on pollution, where it calls for a number of actions that would prefer to have reduced impact on biodiversity and ecosystems, and the pesticides that are in use that are harmful are reduced by at least two-thirds, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste into ecosystem is affected. Target 8 looks at the impact, minimizing the impact of climate change and biodiversity as contributions to mitigation and adaptation, and suggests that it should be contributing to at least 10 gigatons of carbon per year in global efforts to reduce the climate change related aspects. Looking at the people's needs are met through sustainable use and benefit sharing. Target 9 looks at ensuring benefits, including benefits of nutrition, food security, medicines, and livelihoods for people, especially for the vulnerable communities, are managed and provided using sustainable management of wild, terrestrial, freshwater, and marine species, but also protecting the customary sustainable use of indigenous people and local communities. Target 10 looks at all areas under agriculture, aquaculture, and forestry are managed sustainably so that we increase the productivity as well as we increase the resilience of these ecosystems. Target 11 looks at maintaining and enhancing nature's contribution for quality, quantity of water, and also for other important ecosystem services, as well as protection from hazards and extreme events for all people. Target 12 looks at increasing in the area access to and benefits from green and blue spaces for human health, well-being in urban areas and other densely populated areas. Target 13 focuses on implementing measures at global level, but in all countries, to facilitate access to genetic resources and also ensure that fair and equitable benefit sharing happens when ABS provisions are invoked. Addressing or achieving the global biodiversity framework, supported by a number of tools and solutions that are contained in Target 14, for example, that looks at fully integrated biodiversity values into policies, regulations, and planning at the national level. That includes mainstreaming biodiversity for poverty reduction, considering the contributions of biodiversity in national accounting and assessments, as well as on environmental impacts. Target 15 looks at the need for all businesses, public and private, large, medium, and small businesses, to assess and report on their dependencies and impacts on biodiversity from local to global, progressively reduce the negative impacts, at least by half, and increase positive impacts by reducing the biodiversity risks to business so that the production practices, sourcing, supply chains, use, and disposal are all biodiversity friendly. Target 16 looks at ensuring that people are encouraged and enabled to make responsible choices, and they have access to decision making through relevant information and alternatives, but also wants countries and the stakeholders to reduce at least by half the waste, and also issues related to overconsumption of food and other materials. Target 7 looks at establishing and strengthening capacity for implementation of measures to prevent, manage, control potential adverse impacts of biotechnology on biodiversity and human health. Target 18 looks at the need for redirecting, repurposing, reforming, and eliminating incentives that are harmful to biodiversity by at least $500 billion per year. So the focus is on perverse incentives as far as Target 18 is concerned. Target 19 looks at financing, where it looks at increasing the financial flow from all sources to at least $200 billion per year, including new and additional and effective national resources, financial resources, increasing by at least 10 billion per year. international financial flows to developing countries, but also leveraging finances from other sources, as well as increasing the capacity of countries to deal with financing. Target 20 focuses on the issue of indigenous people and local communities, where it requires that we ensure that the relevant knowledge, including the traditional knowledge and innovations, are appropriately recognized through prior and informed consent, and also to ensure that they are appropriately used for effective management of biodiversity. Target 21 looks at ensuring equitable and effective participation in decision making by indigenous people and local communities through respect to the rights of these people over lands, territories, and resources, as well as those of girls and youth. And a set of enabling conditions on how these can work are also elaborated in the draft that looks at the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. It requires integrated governance and a whole of government approach, not just ministries of environment. It also calls for having a whole of society approach, not just those who are interested or involved in conservation action. It also looks at efficiency and effectiveness that needs to be enhanced with multilateral environmental agreements and other processes, and all of it to be done ensuring that we respect gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, reducing inequalities, and supporting rights-based approaches. It also requires responsibility and transparency by countries having national targets that will be established after the adoption of the framework and the targets, and also requires countries to look at reporting on national targets so that appropriate monitoring measures can be put in place. It also requires enabling the evaluation of national and collective actions, as well as development of complementary approaches to allow other actors, the non-state actors, to contribute to the implementation of framework, but also most importantly, to report on the commitments and actions such people or such stakeholders would contribute to. It looks at outreach and awareness by improving requesting understanding, awareness and appreciation of the values of biodiversity, as well as raising the awareness of all actors on the existence of the goals and the targets, and also promoting platforms and partnerships, including with media and civil society, so that we can share experiences, lessons learned. The working group is also going to suggest to COP that the COP would look at an enhanced multilateral, multidimensional approach to planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. The COP would also address the need for updating a plan of action on subnational governments, cities, and local authorities. It also will support a strategy for resource mobilization and a long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support nationally determined priorities, a gender action plan, and also a communication strategy. How does one monitor activities related to these? There are a set of headline indicators that are identified as a part of the draft. Some of them are already in use, some of them are under development, or some of them are to be developed. For example, for goals A, B, C, D, we have goals C and D where the target indicators need to be developed, whereas for goal B, it is almost ready, focusing on the issue of valuation. And goal A, of the 4 indicators suggested, 2 are in use and 2 are near ready. Target 1, the indicator is still to be developed. Target 3, we have existing targets, which is related to protected areas. Target 4, we have 1 of the 2 that are existing and 1 is under development, but the available indicator focuses on human-elephant conflict. Target 12 and target 7, we do have the ongoing efforts in terms of using the headline indicators, but for target 6, 8, 9, 10, and 11, they actually are near ready. So it is expected that these headline indicators would be ready fairly soon. Target 30, 15, 17, and 20 still need to be developed, whereas for the rest of them, essentially for target 16 and target 21, they are almost ready, whereas for target 18 and 14, we have some existing indicators that can be used. So in terms of a very quick analysis, we have 5 indicators that needs to be developed, 5 targets where the indicators need to be developed. For 8 targets, they are near ready, but still are not in use. For 3, they are partially in use, and for rest of them, they are fully in use. Also, the working group will discuss the issue of digital sequence information. And I just have 2 slides before I close the presentation. One focusing on the issue of how countries would like to address the issue of digital sequence information on the approach, and wish to ensure that the DSI discussion should not prevent access. It also suggests recognition that benefits arising from the use should be shared fairly and equitably, and the possible modalities for benefit sharing needs to be put in place, and capacity building has to also to be formed. It has 5 options that are identified in terms of the future work on DSI. Option 0 is do nothing, just status quo. Option 1 is DSI is fully integrated in the convention and the Nagoya Protocol. Option 2 looks at a standard mutually agreed terms. 1, which is 2.1, that looks at every country developing their own mutually agreed terms models, or 2, to have a standardized mutually agreed terms at the international level. Option 3 looks at no PIC, no MAC, no prior informed consent required, no mutually agreed term required. And it has 2 options, sub-options, one on the payment for access to DSI, and the other one is other payments and contributions. Option 4, to focus only on technical and scientific cooperation, and option 5, no benefit sharing from DSI. So certainly those are the points that will come up for discussion under DSI, and certainly, as it was mentioned, that we are looking at 2 sittings of the working group, one that will be held 23rd of August to 3rd of September, which is the first session, which is the virtual session, and we expect to have sometime early next year the second in-person session that will finalize the discussions and provide the recommendations to COP15. So I'll stop at that and welcome comments, questions and suggestions, but also identification of some priorities for the region, as well as the follow-up actions that you would prefer, both from the regional office of UNEP and UNEP, to support your participation in these events. Thank you very much, Yvette.
Thank you very much, Bala. I think that was a lot of information shared today, and I'm sure that there are probably plenty of questions that we've got from the colleagues that are with us today. One of the things that but I think that it's written that there is another presentation happening later, but I think that that's no longer the case, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so perfect. So then,
yeah, excellent. So that completes the presentations.
Perfect, excellent. Well, then what I'm going to do is I think we can give Dr. Lina the floor to her presentation, and then I think what would be great is to open the floor for discussions and questions that cover all the presentations, and so everybody can ask questions to yourself or Jyoti or Lina. I think دكتورة لينا إذا أنت معنا على الخط، أنا بقول إنك تعرضي أنت البرزنتيشن تاعتك، وبعدين إن شاء الله نفتح النقاش أو نفتح النقاش نحكي بالقضايا اللي بتخص منطقتنا إحنا في غرب آسيا بالتحديد. وأتوقع بيكون أحسن لأنه وقتها فينا ناخذ كل المداخلات لأني of the presenters اللي موجودين معنا اليوم. فأستاذ لينا أنت معنا على الخط؟
أيوة عطاء.
حبيبتي فيكي خليني بس أشوف can you present؟
Yes, okay. إن شاء الله.
إذا تقدري أنت تعملي، إحنا عندنا البرزنتيشن بس you should be able to present. إيه خلاص وصلت.
دقيقة عطاء.
أيوة مش مشكلة. فبعد ما تلقي البرزنتيشن دكتورة لينا، إن شاء الله نفتح النقاش لمداخلاتكم وأسئلتكم واستفساراتكم، وأكيد لنحكي بالأولويات والقضايا اللي بتخص منطقتنا بغرب آسيا بالذات.
عطاء شايفين البرزنتيشن؟ Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. It's very clear. تفضلي.
Okay. Greeting everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to participate this meeting. With your permission, I would like to speak in Arabic to make it easier for us to review and discuss the matters at hand. شكرا. Thank you very much. طبعا كلنا شايفين الصورة. أنا أظن أن هذه الصورة قبل سنتين ما كان أحد يعني يعرفها، لكن أظن الحين الكل يعرفها. طبعا هذا أنا أدعو أن الله يحمي الجميع طبعا من كورونا، وتعازي الحارة لكل من فقد عزيز عليه. طبعا سنوات الكورونا أثرت على الجميع في هذا الكوكب، ماكو بقعة ما وصلها هذا الفيروس. طبعا أثر على جميع البشر من نواحي اقتصادية، اجتماعية، علمية وسياسية، وامتدت تشمل آثار جسدية ونفسية. لكن آثارها الجائحة معظمها سلبية، لكن في شيء جانب إيجابي كان في الموضوع، أنه توحدت جهود العلمية عشان إيجاد حلول لهذا المرض. طبعا البحث العلمي توحدت فيه الجهود، ونتمنى أن توحد الجهود عندنا أيضا في الأشياء العلمية للتنوع الأحيائي والحلول جذرية للتنوع الأحيائي. طبعا فترات الحظر الجزئي نشوفها اللي فرضتها بعض الدول أتت نتيجة إيجابية أن استرداد بعض من التنوع الأحيائي اللي كان مفقود في البيئة. عشان كذي نبي نكمل على هذا الموضوع إن شاء الله يعني، ونتمنى الصحة للجميع. أنا أظن ما يسوي next space.
You should have control عليها. حاول تسوي next slide.
أوكي. موضوعي طبعا اليوم أنا عن عرض النتائج الرئيسية للاجتماعين الافتراضيين، الهيئة الفرعية المشورة العلمية في دورتها 24، والهيئة الفرعية للتنفيذ في دورتها الثالثة، اللي تم في 3 مايو ل 13 يونيو 2021. أحب أعرفكم في نفسي. طبعا أنا أعرف الموجودين كلهم، بس حبيت أعرفكم في نفسي. أنا لينا عبد الرحمن العوضي، مدير إدارة المحافظة على التنوع الأحيائي في الهيئة العامة للبيئة دولة الكويت، وعضو مكتب اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي لآسيا والمحيط الهادي. طبعا أول شيء أحب أشكر عطاف والجميع اللي عمل على هذا الاجتماع، لأن هذا الاجتماع كان ودي يصير، وعرضت على الخليج عندنا أن نتم دعوة بازيل وفرانسيس عشان نسوي اجتماع للبوست 2020 قبل كورونا، بس الوقت ما أسعفنا. بس الحمد لله أن هذه خطوة إيجابية أن نسوي هذا الاجتماع نحط جميع مدخلاتنا لمشروع البوست 2020. أول شيء أحب أشكر جميع الأطراف على تعاونهم ومرونتهم في التكيف مع الطريقة الجديدة الحالية، اللي هي طريقة طبعا جديدة على الجميع. هذه الطريقة طبعا اللي هي الاجتماعات أونلاين، والاجتماعات هذه طبعا طريقة جديدة، لكن الحمد لله يعني الجميع تقبلها، وكان متعاونين ومرنين في تقبلها، في تقبل الطريقة. والشكر موصول أيضا لاتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي على عملهم الجاد صراحة، يعني دعموا الأطراف وذللوا جميع الصعاب اللي كانت موجودة واللي يواجهونها الأطراف كلهم في هذه الاجتماعات، من السماح لهم في استعمال مكاتب اليو ان عشان لحضور الاجتماعات، موافقتهم على ارسال المداخلات اللي تتم سواء كانت مكتوبه او بطريق الفيديو. يعني كانوا مرنين جدا، وكانوا وايد يساعدون الجميع الاطراف في الوصول لاحسن حل. طبعا أول عقد الاجتماع الأول، الاجتماع الرابع والعشرين للسبستا في الفترة من 3 مايو إلى 13 يونيو 2021، كان متعاقب مع الاجتماع الثالث للهيئة الفرعية، واللي بدأ بتاريخ 16 مايو لغاية 2 منتهى ب 13 يونيو 2021. طبعا جوثي وبالا عطوا فكرة كبيرة، بس أنا حبيت أقولها يعني بالعربي، وما راح أطول عليكم. راح يعني أعرض شنو توصلنا له بطريقة مختصرة، وأنا عديت جدول في جميع المساعدات عشان الأطراف يكون عندهم بطريقة مختصرة شنو مطلوب وشنو الوثائق الموجودة حق كل بند من البنود الاجتماعات. طبعا أكبر مشكلة واجهتنا كإقليم كانت وقت الاجتماع. احنا كان عندنا البلاء والدول اللي يمها كان يصادف الساعة 1 بالليل أو 2 بالليل، فكان عامل الوقت كان وايد يعني مؤثر على الإقليم عندنا، فنشوف إن الحضور كان شوية أقل لأن حسب الوقت اللي احنا موجودين فيه. بعدين لما في الاجتماعات كانت الأولوية كانت للبنود اللي لها صلة مباشرة لإطار العالمي لما بعد 2020. طبعا عدوا الرئيسين المشاركين للسبستا والسي بي دي بعدين تقرير وقدموه للرؤساء ملوت الإطار العالمي لما بعد 2020. كل الوثائق اللي انعرضت في الاجتماعين، طبعا الاجتماعين تقسم سووا جزئين، الجزء الاول اللي حضرناه اللي هو كان فيرتشوال، الجزء الثاني راح يكون حضوري. طبعا كل الوثائق اللي انعرضت في الجزء الاول للاجتماعين لم يتم الموافقه النهائيه عليهم، ولكن تأجيل الموافقة على النتائج النهائية في الدورة المستأنفة للاجتماعين اللي راح تعقد حضوريا إن شاء الله. في حطوا احتمال أن تكون شهر 1. طبعا سويسرا مشكورة دعت أن يكون الاجتماع عندها، بس إلى الآن لم يتم أخذ أي قرار بهذا الشأن. طبعا انخفاض مشاركة البلدان النامية في بعض الدورات أدى إلى مشكلة أن في بعض الوثائق حطوهم الوثيقة كلها بين قوسين عشان كان الحضور فعلا كان أقل، وكانت هذه مواضيع مهمة لازم يتم مراجعتها من قبل الأطراف كلها. راح أذكرهم لاحقا البندين اللي حطوهم كلهم بين أقواس. طبعا أول شيء بالنسبة حق الاجتماع 24 اللي تم من 3 إلى 13 في طلع منا 6 وثائق الدوكيومنت و3 وثائق CRBs، وتم تشكيل فيه 4 فرق اتصال. إذا بنستعرض بند طبعا في البند الثالث في L2 و L3 وكان في تشكيل فريق اتصال حق الجوانب التقنية والعلمية لغاية وأهداف الإطار العالمي للتنوع البيولوجي وإطار الرصد المقترح. البند رقم 4 بشأن البيولوجيا التركيبية طلع في دوكيومنت وكان في فريق اتصال أيضا. الدوكيومنت هذا كان L5. بالنسبة حق البند الخامس اللي هو تقييم المخاطر وإدارة المخاطر المتعلقة بالكائنات الحية طلع منه دوكيومنت واحد اللي هو L6 وكان فيه هم تشكل في فريق اتصال. البند السادس هو التنوع البيولوجي البحري والساحلي. طبعا في طلع في تشكل في فريق اتصال ايضا لحاجته طبعا، وهذا علما بان هذه كل المواضيع اللي انا تكلمت فيهم كانوا في شهر 3 هم تم مناقشتهم من قبل الاطراف. طبعا في هذا البند رقم 6 اللي هو التنوع البيولوجي البحري والساحلي طلع منه 2 دوكيومنت CRB اللي هم 2 and 4 و4. والبند السابع مال التنوع البيولوجي والزراعة طلع فيه دوكيومنت واحد اللي هو L3. البرنامج عمل المنبر الحكومي الدولي اللي هو البند الثامن طلع فيه دوكيومنت واحد اللي هو L4. بعدين البند التاسع طبعا ما صار شيء في هذا البند التاسع. طبعا تم القراءة الأولى، لكن راح يتم إنشاء مجموعة اتصال وراح يطورون الدوكيومنت مالهم قبل الاجتماع القادم إن شاء الله. البند العاشر الأنواع الغريبة الغازية في دوكيومنت واحد اللي هو CRB 7. أما بالنسبة حق الاجتماع الثالث للهيئة الفرعية للتنفيذ طبعا أنا عندي معلومات أكثر منه لأن أنا عضو مكتب فيه، وكنا نناقش فيه وايد أشياء. طبعا في 1830 مشارك شاركوا في الاجتماع، وكانوا من تقريبا 128 طرف، 1140 مراقب سجلوا من 190 منظمة. طبعا هذه كانت فرصة كبيرة. طبعا الاجتماعات الفيرتشوال كانت عطت فرصة أكبر لعدد من المشاركين. طبعا كان في نقص أموال قبل عشان الحضور الشخصي، بس هذا عطى فرصة كبيرة للمشاركين إنه أكبر عدد ممكن، خاصة من المنظمات والمراقبين. طبعا الاجتماع عقد من 16 مايو إلى 13 يوليو بالتعاقب مع الاجتماع الأول مال SBSTTA 24. القرارات اللي انوخذت فيه طبعا تم تأجيل النظر في بعض من CRPs لما الدورة الجاية اللي هي تكون الحضور فيها شخصي، مثل CRP 5 للبند 9، CRP 15 البند 6، CRP 4 البند اللي 6 هو اللي بشأن تعبئة الموارد، 4 CRP 4 عشان البند السابع بشأن إدارة المعرفة، وكان في 6 البند 7 بشأن CRP 6 البند 7 بشأن تقييم الإطار الاستراتيجي لبناء القدرات في بروتوكول ناغويا، والCRP 13 بشأن البند 7 اللي هو بناء القدرات، والCRP 9 البند 5 بشأن ما بعد 2020، وCRP 10 للبند 10 بشأن فعاليات العمليات، والCRP 8 هذا كلهم تأجلوا طبعا. البند 11 بشأن المشاركة مع الحكومات دون الوطنية، وCRP 16 تبع البند 11 بس موضوع للتعميم، بموضوع التعميم. وبالنسبة للبند 8 في ال SBI طبعا هو بشأن التعاون أو عشان ضيق الوقت طبعا، وكان ما في وقت، أنا المناقشات كانت تأخذ وقت طويل. راح يتم إعادة فتح هذا البند في الدورة المستأنفة الجاية قبل لا يبتدون مراجعة CRPs. كان عدد الوثائق الأقل اللي طلعت من الاجتماع كانت 5 وثائق تشكل 5 فرق اتصال و11 CRPs في من الاجتماع. الفرق الاتصال تشكلت عن أول فريق خطة تنفيذ بعد 2020 وخطة عمل بناء القدرات لبروتوكول قرطاجنة. الثاني كان بشأن حشد الموارد والآلية المالية. الفريق الاتصال الثالث عن بناء القدرات والتعاون، هو البند السابع التقني والعلمي ونقل التكنولوجيا والمعارف. وكان البند اللي سووا فيه فريق اتصال كان الاتصالات. هذا البند الاتصالات البند 7 هو اللي ممثل أوغندا تحدث باسم المجموعة الأفريقية، وفضل إنه يحط الوثيقة هذه كلها بين أقواس، لأن كان الموضوع مهم، والدول من أفريقيا قال فريق الاتصال ما حضر معظم الاجتماعات ملوته، ففضل انه يحطه. وايضا في البند 3 مال استعراض التقدم المحرز في تنفيذ الاتفاقيه والخطه الاستراتيجيه ممثل الكونغو وتحدث باسم المجموعه الافريقيه. ايضا حط البند هذا الدوكيومنت بتوين براكت، كل الوثيقه كلها بين اقواس لعدم تمكنه من حضور. الحضور كان بالنسبه حق هذا البند في فريق الاتصال كان جدا قليل من هذا، ففضلوا انه يحطوا لهم بتوين براكت الوثيقه كلها. البند 9 طبعا انشا في فريق اتصال ايضا. تقريبا هذه جميع المخرجات من الاجتماعين 24 للسبستا والثالث للSBI الجزء الاول منهم. وأنا حضرت إن شاء الله جدول في جميع اللي قدمته في لتسهيلا للدول، وراح اقدمه ان شاء الله من خلال UNDP لكم ان شاء الله باذن الله. وشاكره لكم حسن الاستماع، شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا كثير استاذة لينا. اي ثينك اعطيتي كمان ملخص يعني كثير حلو للبرزنتيشنز كمان اللي صارت من جوتي وبالا اند فاتوقع يعني اكيد راح يكون في اسئله من الحضور معنا اليوم. وحابين احنا يعني على اساس انه عم بطلع على الساعه 1:30 واحنا اجتماعنا للساعه 2، فانا ما حابه انه اخذ كثير من الوقت من صوبي، ولكن حابه اني انا افتح المجال لمداخلات من عندكم من الحضور، وان كان من ناحيه البرزنتيشنز اللي قدموها جوتي ولا بالا ولا الدكتوره لينا، او اذا في عندكم اي اسئله او استفسارات. اوف كورس احنا بلشنا الاجتماع اليوم مع مداخله من استاذ قتيبه من السعوديه، فأتوقع الجميع سمعها، بس I will translate that comment too because of Bala and Jyoti that are with us. If you remember, Bala, very early on in the meeting we had an input from Saudi Arabia in regards to the priorities that were set, and he indicated, you know, recently with the forest fires that have been happening in the region and in Europe, that's something that should be considered within the strategy itself, but also in terms of looking at the red list species and what can be done at a national level. So I hope that I reflected that correctly. So that was the first input that we had received from Qutaiba from Saudi Arabia. And of course, I want to open the floor up, looking at the time that there's half an hour left for the meeting. I really want to bring in and have the discussion in terms of the priorities in West Asia, and for that to be provided by the colleagues who are with us here today. Over to you, Bala, if you would like to respond to Qutaiba from Saudi Arabia. أستاذ قتيبة إذا في أي شيء زيادة عن اللي أنت of course حكيته ببداية الاجتماع، إذا في عندك أي مداخلة زيادة أو أخلي بالا إنه يرد عليك بهذا السؤال.
Thank you very much, Taf. That's enough till this moment, and I يعني waiting for your important presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. So Bala, over to you in terms
Sure.
of priorities, how those can be integrated. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Even though the current targets may not have the language directly related to the issue of forest fires and things, if you look at target 11 of the 21 targets that are currently in the draft form, it clearly has a focus on issues related to extreme events and events that will be necessary to look at regulation of ecosystems, actions in protection from hazards and extreme events. That sort of is one. So there is a direct relationship. If you're looking at it, it's more in terms of target 11. And secondly, what is also important for parties and also participants at this particular briefing to understand is that even though the targets are set at the global level, countries actually have the freedom. They actually have all the possibilities of developing targets that are directly related to the global targets, where depending on the priorities of the country or priority of the region, certainly they can develop their own indicators and their own set of targets that could be contributing to identifying some very specific priorities that are required for individual countries. So certainly, if I'm going to be addressing directly the question on how to deal with the issue of forest fires, for example, for Saudi Arabia, there is nothing which is stopping from Saudi Arabia from using target 11 of the global biodiversity framework as the language stands now, subject to any decisions or modifications that will happen later. It is certainly for Saudi Arabia to develop their own national target related to that, and also a set of indicators that can help them to push forward that idea. So certainly target 11 speaks about issues that cause hazards and issues that need resilience from countries. and countries actually have an opportunity to do it. It can be fires, it can be floods, it can be earthquakes, it can be tsunamis, whatever, depending on the nature of the country and the nature of the hazard. Target 11 can easily be used to cover some of those aspects. Thank you.
Thanks بالا. استاذ قطيبة يمكن رد عليك استاذ بالا، بتحب انه اترجم لك ولا you're okay with the response?
يعني thank you very much my dear friend, but I think as you know, the forest fire or the vegetation fire is globally now. It's not the individual for the certain country, and this, you know, related directly with the biodiversity, and we have to take a lot of actions regarding this. As you know, we have the regional maybe or global decision for this, how to cooperate to defense of our biodiversity, and you know, it's affect a lot of things, either the economy and the social people, with social economic factor with the people who live in this forest, and forest, a lot of so I think if we take a decision to make some not I say the group or committee special for that phenomena, because you know it's not nature, as you know, maybe 5 or less than 10% is related to the nature, and you know the other reasons. So this is my voice for that.
Agreed. Certainly, I agree, because it's just not a problem for one country or the region, West Asia. If you take Europe, for example, this year has been a really bad year for forest fires. The wildfires, Australia, Oceania had a huge issue, you know, a couple of years ago. So certainly, yes. So definitely, it's a priority area, and it's up to the region and the country also to, you know, have a kind of a joint discussion. Like, say, for example, European Union, as you know, is already discussing in terms of a regional action plan to deal with wildfires, based on the experience they've had this year, especially. This summer has been really, really bad for Europe in terms of wildfires. So certainly the region can definitely come together, and that can be an important issue for you to consider, given the contribution. I mean, there are a lot of positive contributions, but there are also a lot of negative contributions to biodiversity when it comes to some of these fires and stuff like that. So, completely in the hands of the region and the country to come up with their own ideas, their own strategy and plans, and more regions and more countries to join, the better, because that strengthens the issue, and that strengthens the scientific and the technical and the policy focus on finding answers to some of those problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Bala. Thanks, Ustaz Qutaiba. I think you bring up a very interesting point, Bala, is I think it's really, once these regional priorities have been identified, then it comes to what kind of mechanisms. Either it comes down to that national level, or also looking at, for example, what are the regional mechanisms that are already in place that can address such issues. And so I think that this is very important to be reflected, whether as you bring down these targets and these these targets and indicators to that level. فاستاذ قطيبة اذا بس فيني انا اشرح انه احنا بنطلع انه على التارجتس اللي محطوطين هن او هاي الاهداف هي كثير ات جلوبال ليفل، وانديد مثل ما انت تفضلت انه بخصوص الفورست فايرز فهي موجوده بتارجت 11 مثل ما تفضل بالا، ولكن هون بيجي يمكن الميكانيزمز اللي احنا موجوده عندنا بالمنطقه، كيف فينا ننزل هاي الاهداف لمستوى يمكن اقليمي او مستوى حتى وطني، وحتى تديفلوب مؤشرات، يعني مجموعه مؤشرات اللي هي تابعه للمنطقه specifically، يا اما at a regional approach او يا اما at a national level، على مستوى وطني او على مستوى اقليمي. Yes, Bala.
Thank you. If you look at the outcomes of the SBI-3 document, even though it is bracketed and still it is in a draft form, unlike the earlier SBIs or the discussions we have had in preparation for the Aichi targets, this time if you look at the overall document, the outcomes of the discussion so far, there are at least 5 or 6 places where the SBI is very clearly recommending specific regional approaches for effective implementation of this particular framework. There are requests for regional organizations, including UNEP regional offices, to provide support and input. There is a recommendation for having regional technical centers or technical hubs to deal with supporting countries in the region. There is a recommendation for regional capacity building, knowledge transfer, technology transfer related platforms. So this SBI, the outcomes that are with us in the draft form, certainly support regional approaches in addition to global and national approaches, which is a significant point that countries should consider, essentially when we are discussing some of issues like invasive species. Yeah. It may be a big problem, but invasive species are also a regional issue to a certain extent. Yes. So some of these approaches can certainly be effectively looked at by the countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bala. We have a request from Bilal. Ustaz Bilal, تفضل.
يعطيك العافية. يعطيك العافية عواطف. بحب أرحب أول شيء بكافة الزملاء الكرام واللي تشرفت في العمل واللقاء فيهم، ومشتاقين نشتاق لكم جدا. We miss you so much.
Thank you, Bilal. I was about to say, I was happy to see you on the participant list. So thank you. How are you? Everything is okay?
Thank you. Maybe Awatif can speak English or Arabic. That's
تفضل أستاذ بلال. By the way, بس عشان أوضح، في عطاف وفي عواطف. هلا هو ثابت إنه both of us are together واسماء متشابهة، ولكن إحنا ثلاثة واحد أكيد. بس تفضل أستاذ بلال اللي بريحك باللغة اللي بريحك.
Fine. Maybe my comments, I will talk about it. Maybe I will take this part to talk about that. Maybe we can discuss it deeply through WG3. But one of things I think, and what my colleague Kutaiba said, and you, Bala, the case of climate change and the increasing of temperature of Earth is come from unsustainable use of natural resources. So one main thing, it is biodiversity. And as you know all, the keep biodiversity cost is lower than make restoration program. When reviewing the draft of post 2020, which come from Secretariat, and I will take this opportunity to thank all co-chairs for this good work. But for example, when we're talking in stage D1, when we're talking about financial mechanism, about $700 billion, this is very important to thinking about that and where the source of money. One of the things, GCF is the new financial mechanism, but when we're reviewing GCF, it is not bought biodiversity under the financial projects under it. So how we can solve this, and what happened during discussion with Secretariat of GCF to address biodiversity, under one of the topics for financial during that. By this way, I think we can make some activities and keep our forest, which is the sink of CO2, and minimize the climate change effects and minimize the highest degradation. This is things maybe I think to talking about. And on the other hand, I don't want to take this dialogue about DSI and what having through DSI related to Nagoya Protocol. Maybe we will talking about that in WG3. We have good interventions. Maybe we can talking about during the meeting next week. Maybe, but I thinking care about how we can implement our draft of post 2020. The main challenge for our region is the financial mechanism. As you know, we are a developed country in most of around, and we're facing many challenges during that. So one of mechanism, as you know, Jeff not give a high rate of funding or other things. Now the working or countries focusing on GCF, and it is one of good financial mechanism we can working on it. This is maybe for this meeting my notes. I hope not take long time. Thank you very much for all, and hope so see you soon after finishing that critical issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr.
Bilal. Thank you. Let me quickly respond. I'm sure other colleagues, Jyoti, may have additional points. Certainly, yes. See, remember the $700 billion requirement for realizing the post-2020 framework has been arrived at based on experts' inputs. It's based on the assessments. It's based on the kind of requirements of funding. Having said that, there are two elements to this discussion. One element is to consolidate what is already available. And secondly, to use the resources on issues that are a priority for a country. So if you remember, one of the outcomes of COP11 in 2012 was that by 2015, countries would have already developed a national financing plan for achieving the Aichi biodiversity targets. But for various reasons, countries probably did not have capacity or wherewithal to develop the plans. But currently, the draft implementation plan very clearly requests countries to develop a national financing plan. So what would definitely help this discussion forward would be, number one, given that we have the 21 targets, and as you know, the discussions would be on what to add into the target, what not to add into the target, how to modify the language, will be the kind of discussions. And more or less all the countries also have their national biodiversity strategies and action plans that are already ready. What could certainly help at the country level to do, maybe immediately after the working group meeting, when we'll get a sense of the focus of these targets, is to start preparing a kind of a financing plan on if, for example, Jordan is going to be working on the biodiversity framework, and if it identifies of the 21 targets, 6 targets are our priority for Jordan, and this is what we would like to do, and do a costing of it. So you will already begin to look at how much of resources are required. So that is more an assessment part of it. The second part of it is that how do you now raise the resources? Global Environment Facility is a financing mechanism that is only one source of resources that could be made available, but then there are options for countries to also innovate, to experiment with other options. And that is why, for example, many countries, essentially from the Africa region, for example, are now encouraging, pushing during the negotiation process as a part of the implementation plan to establish a dedicated biodiversity fund, which is in addition to the Global Environment Facilities that could provide the required predictable finances for implementation. Of course, as you know, when you're looking at a discussion like establishment of a fund, it's just not technical, it is not financial, but it is also political. So we have to wait and see on how this discussion is going to go forward. But certainly there is going to be a big push based on our own discussions with colleagues from Africa. We actually had a regional briefing for Africa on the 12th, just a few days ago, where very clearly African region said that biodiversity finance and the fund is a priority for us, and we are certainly going to be pushing for it. So there are two elements in preparation for COP15 immediately after the adoption are to one, to prepare a national priority list of what you would like to do, what are the set of activities 5 years, 10 years down the line, and how much of money it costs. Do an assessment of what is already available, not just GEF, but also from other sources, but also participate in the discussions to see how much we can actually look at the possibility of a dedicated fund to deal with biodiversity. So it's just not about the money, but it is also the governance of the fund where we should also be providing some of our inputs. I'll stop there. Thank you. Jyoti, as I am.
Hi, may I come in here?
Yes, of course.
Just add a little bit. So I just wanted to talk about the 700 billion per year. The 700 billion per year is actually divided into two parts. And if you see, that's target 18 and target 19. And target 18 is where the bulk is, which is 500 billion. And there we're talking about redirecting, repurposing, reforming, and eliminating incentives harmful for biodiversity, So this is money that already exists. It is how, as Bala said, how through a national biodiversity financing plan, and maybe you could look at things that BioFin is doing, that UNDP is doing, and all, to see how you can use the existing money towards protecting rather than being harmful towards biodiversity. We are saying that there needs to be an increase of 200 billion a year, including 10 billion from ODA. And that is the new and additional resources. But 500 billion is money that already exists and needs to be repurposed and redirected. I think we talked about this during the Aichi targets also, but such considerable effort has not taken place, and therefore we are mostly exactly where we were in 2010 with this particular target. Additionally, where GCF is concerned, about over 60% of them money goes towards nature-based solutions, including deforestation, including RED+, so keeping forests, and results-based payments for RED+. And we are in conversation with the GCF Secretariat, and we are one of their advisors on the way forward, the CBD Secretariat, on how money can be spent, taking into account the multiple benefits to biodiversity. And here again, I will say what I said during my presentation. I think one of the issues that exist, which we have seen through lessons from Aichi, and it's also part of the GBO5, is that a lot of silos exist within countries, within our own bodies. I mean, we're so many MEAs, and we all kind of go off on our own tangent. And through the GBF, we are trying to make it a framework for all, so that countries and MEAs can together, through synergies, reach a scaled up implementation for the environment as a whole. So I mean, the environment feels all actions once. So we should all work together to amplify that action. And therefore, I think there is very much a need for some synergies, not only at the international level, which is what we are trying to do, but very much at a country level, where you need to have some sort of coordination mechanisms, where when a project is being put in for GCF consideration, perhaps we should also be listing the multiple benefits to biodiversity. And that is something that we are, in fact, speaking with the GCF Secretariat, where they're talking about safeguards, and biodiversity is a safeguard, is one of their ESS, the environmental and social governance standards. They should look at ways to track and trace impact on biodiversity. And so I'm not sure that we can say that the GCF is just looking at energy efficiency and all of that, but they're also looking at eco-based approaches, ecosystem-based approaches. I think they need to amplify it more. We need to amplify it more, but we need to have much more coherence and coordination in all of this. I'm not sure that a new mechanism is going to solve any problems. So perhaps we should be coordinating and being more coherent amongst different mechanisms. I was part of the whole decisions of how the GCF came up, and it's very complicated, and it took it nearly 2 years to be operational, 2-3 years to be operational, by which time we will be in 2030 already, and so we have to be very careful about where we want to go, and whether we should be supporting the mechanisms that already exist. Perhaps we should look at expanding mandate of GCF or, things like that. But so, these are all, as Bala said, it's part of this is also political considerations. So we should be looking at what is the most efficient and effective way for all of us so that 10 years from now, we're not sitting exactly where we are now. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jyoti. Indeed, very valid points. Just looking at the time, I'd really like to get more input from the participants that are with us today. Dr. Talib, please تفضل. You raised your hand.
شكرا لك اختطاف. عندي سؤال واستيضاح. الغاية التي تتحدث عن زيادة نسبة حماية الأراضي والمياه لتصل إلى 30%، هل هو المقصود البر والبحر مع بعض أم على انفراد؟
Okay, Bala, we have a question from Dr. Talib asking about the protected areas. I think he's trying to ask whether the 30% actually targets both marine and terrestrial, or is it just one or the other?
Sorry, can you come again? Is 30%?
The 30% in terms of protected areas, the target that's set, is it just for marine or is it marine and terrestrial both combined?
It's combined.
Combined. Esther Talib.
شكرا اتضحت الرؤية وشكرا لكم جزيلا وشكرا لك.
عفوا شكرا كثير. انا حابه بس انه اخذ مداخلات كمان زياده من عنا وخصوصا in terms of the priorities للمنطقه لانه هاي كلياتها رح it will be integrated in the discussions and included in the discussions that are going to happen. it will be good to kind of get الفيدباك بتاعتكم ومداخلاتكم بخصوص الاولويات للمنطقه لمنطقه غرب اسيا. فهل في اي مداخلات بهذا الموضوع بليز؟ ما في اي مداخلات. We're trying to get the priorities, Bala, from the regional priorities sure. From the participants, and so I'm just I've opened the floor for that discussion. من السعودية عندنا دكتور فيصل. أستاذ فيصل تفضل.
السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
أحب أشكر المنظمين على هذه الورشة الهامة. أنا عندي استفسار بسيط بخصوص الإطار وأهداف الإطار الآن. فيما يتعلق الآن بالاعتماد الإطار بيكون إن شاء الله في بعد مفردات الاجتماع القادم الثالث. السؤال الآن: ماذا ستقدم أمال اتفاقية التنوع الأحيائي بعد اعتماد إطار الدول الأطراف من حيث التنفيذ، يعني مساعدة الدول في تنفيذ أهداف هذا الإطار؟
Support for implementation يعني.
نعم. هذا يعني ودي أن نستوضح من السكرتارية بخصوص هذا الموضوع.
From Saudi Arabia, Mr. Faisal had a question, Bala and Jyoti, in terms of support for implementation from the Secretariat, precisely. What kind of support will be extended for national level implementation once the framework has been approved?
I think that comes to me, I suppose.
Yes.
And as the Director of Implementation at CBD, I am also trying to try and figure out what kind of support we can provide parties. So as you know, we are not an implementation agency. We are a secretariat. We provide support in form of guidance that the parties request us to develop. So we are definitely going to be looking at guidance for national reporting. We shall be looking at guidance for NBSAP, guidance for any national, any on indicators. So we will provide you, we are already providing you a monitoring framework, which we hope will be ready and adopted by COP15.
We've lost your voice, Jyoti, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think if I remove my, but and I think it echoes in my head, so I remove it. But anyway, so we should be providing also a capacity building strategy, resource mobilization strategy. We should be also providing guidance. We will be providing guidance to the GEF, our financial mechanism, and working with them. So there's a whole package of things that we are hoping parties will decide, and we will provide to national governments. And don't forget, we have our CHM mechanism. So there is not only support for you to set up your national CHM mechanisms, but through the CHM mechanism, we will provide lessons, provide information, communication among all parties, more South-South collaboration and South, North and South collaboration. So a lot more of so a lot of the work that we have done in the past, but this time I think we are going to be looking more around results-based management to see how we are actually reaching, how the world is actually reaching the targets and the goals that they have agreed to at COP15. So there's going to be a much bigger effort put at monitoring this time and helping countries to see where their gaps are. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Jyoti. Indeed, I think I think it is left to tell what's going to happen, how the tools will be developed, and what tools will be developed that can be used by the national at the national level. فهاي الادوات اللي راح تساعد من ناحيه الامبلمنتيشن استاذ فيصل اللي راح تنعمل، وحيكون في a lot more tools، يمكن ادوات اكثر من الفتره اللي مضيت لحتى تساعد من ناحيه التنفيذ بالاخر. وهي في مثلا ادوات لديفلوبينج الاستراتيجيه، المؤشرات، المراقبه والمتابعه، وحتى من ناحيه تدريب وورش عمل. Bala, you wanted to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, two aspects to that. I mean, in terms of the tools, certainly, whatever is the language or whatever are the details of the targets that needs to be adopted, to an extent, we all know what is going to be the overall focus of the framework and what are the key issues that the framework and the targets are going to be addressing. So what certainly would help even now for countries or regions to start putting together is a kind of a very simple mapping exercise that, given the elements of the framework and the targets that are available, what are the immediate priorities for a country or a region in terms of activities? Identify a set of tools and things that are required for effective implementation. And if countries can start putting that together already, for example, immediately after the working group meeting and before or prior to the COP15 meeting, because remember, COP is going to make decisions, but certainly the discussions are going to be more in terms of refining the words, adding a paragraph here, removing a paragraph there, or adjusting some elements here. But the overall framework and the structure, we are all aware. So what certainly could help, even in preparation for COP15, would be for countries and regions to already start mapping. For example, why are we able to discuss the financing number? Because work on, if the targets are going to be agreed, this is the possible amount of resources required to achieve the target. And that is the reason why we are able to discuss the numbers. If in the absence of those numbers, our discussions on financing can go nowhere. So in that regard, if, for example, the region, West Asia, would like to come up with a set of ideas, a set of priorities, short-term, medium-term activities that you would like to pursue, these are the kinds of support you're looking for. And to an extent, remember, unless you have a dedicated project that supports all the targets for every country, it's not going to be for any organization or any entity to support every country in everything. And that is why some regional prioritization could also be helpful. For example, at UNEP, we are now preparing a kind of a guidance document to be ready by about early next year. That could help countries on how to deal with the existing national biodiversity strategies and action plans, updating them in light of the new biodiversity framework and the targets. So it's going to be a tool on how do you do it? Where do you start? What are the things you will discuss? How do you modify it? So countries can do, okay, now that there is a, now how do we do with financing? What is the amount of resources available? How much more money I need? Where do I get it? This is my amount of money available. This is the gap. So I need to fill the gap. So if countries can already start, because unfortunately or fortunately, we have now some time before COP15 in-person meeting that will make the decisions, because we're not going to make any decisions immediately now. So even if you're going to have 4, 5, 6 months between now and COP15, it is a reasonable amount of time for countries to start looking at, okay, now that the framework is there, how do I implement it? What are my priorities? These are the set of activities. This is the resource. This is the requirements I have, so that it can be a kind of an information document, not just for Secretariat to CBD or for UNEP or GEF or UNDP, but it can be a document that can be used by a number of agencies. The regional offices of UNEP can use it. NGOs can use it. IUCN can use it. WWF. I mean, whoever is interested to support this activity, they will be able to pick up elements of it. And by the time we meet in COP, we already would have had a fairly good idea of what is going to immediately start after the COP is over. Thank you.
Thank you, Bala. I think you bring up an excellent point in terms of mapping out these priorities, تحديد الأولويات إن كانت إقليمية أو حتى الأولويات الوطنية على مثلا على قصيرة وطويلة المدى. يعني I think this is something that is very important whether at a regional level or at a national level in terms of feeding into the COP later on. And as you said, the tools that even UNEP, I mean, the tool that you indicated in terms of UNEP preparing and developing in terms of what happens to the NBSAPs, those have already identified the national priorities. So then what happens after that? And how would they be revised? And in terms of that kind of guidance will be very critical, you know, once for during the process of the development and you know, the finalization of the framework, but also in terms of implementation later, in terms of need. شو هي الاحتياجات اللي هي بحاجة للمنطقة ليصير في proper implementation. Bilal, you have your hand up, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Maybe in Jordan, I work on post 2020 in either stage as it's going to be adopted now. Maybe if you see the draft, you have some core things. I think it is agreed from most of parties. So we doing that, for example, in Jordan, and make gap analysis between the current situation and when I to get the goals and milestones in drafted post 2020. So I estimated the cost for implementing, and I know now what I need to can in the same level now to implement it post 2020. So now it is ready for me in Jordan, and I can share that with all colleagues in region, and hope to have regional reviewing for that and preparing it maybe during your UNEP office. That's will fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bilal.
That's brilliant. That'd be brilliant. That's very good.
Exactly, that is really good, and if you can share that, that would be great. I think هاي أنواع الدوكيومنتس اللي يمكن هي كمان مهمة إنه تنعمل بكل الدول على مستوى وطني. بس أنت كمان you bring up a very excellent point in terms of كمان ينعمل at a regional level. هل في بس سؤال بطرحه على جميع عنا، هل في دراسة أو gap analysis انعملت على مستوى الوطني بالبلاد اللي عنا بمنطقة غرب آسيا؟ فهل في حدا عامل نفس الدراسة اللي عملها بلال يمكن في الأردن؟ لا. But I think Bilal, it will be good to learn from the experience and the approach اللي اتخذتوه بالأردن. I think this would be good. But if any of these similar kind of gap analysis has happened at a national level, it'll be good if you can, just let us know if that's been done and the level of what's been done. I think that also provides a lot of input towards and of course lessons learned to the other countries. فهل في أي مداخلات ثانية بهذا الموضوع؟ ما في؟ We're a very quiet group اليوم شكلنا. ما في أي مداخلات أي من ناحية الأولويات اللي بالمنطقة أو أي استفسارات بخصوص البرزنتيشنز اللي تقدموا اليوم؟ خلاص. I think it's we're close to the end of the meeting. إذا ما في أي مداخلات تاني بحب أنا of course أتشكركم جميعا على الحضور اليوم. Before we sign out, I realized that we did not take a group photo للاجتماع. ففيني أطلب from everybody to switch on their cameras to see your lovely faces and take a nice group photo of everyone that's with us today, if that's okay. Please فيكم تشغلوا الكاميرات على أساس ناخذ صورة جماعية للاجتماع اليوم. أهلين دكتور عيسى، أهلين بالجميع، أهلين. أهلا وسهلا. Oh, it's nice to see faces. تعودنا من بعد البانديميك بنحكي للسكرين ف it's nice to see people's faces. طيب let's في anybody else switching on their cameras؟ ناخذ صورة جماعية. عواطف معاي انت على الخط؟
اي عطاف معك.
يلا
في احد بعد يبي يعني اضافه
يطلع في الصورة.
خلاص
خذي الصورة.
اوكي تمام.
شكرا. بحب أتشكركم جميعا على الحضور. أكيد أنا حاضرة لأي أسئلة وأي استفسارات إن كان هلا ولا بعد الاجتماع. أكيد إحنا حاضرين لنحكي معاكم كمان من ناحية تخطيطكم أو خططكم للترتيبات للكوب وللCBD COP وإحنا حاضرين أكيد to provide any guidance أو أي support من هالناحية. فبليز لا تترددوا في التواصل معي. واكيد مع استاذ بالا ومع ست جويتي اليوم. فبليز feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, if you need any guidance or any support. Of course, we're more than happy to organize similar meetings in the future when needed, and just please let us know when that can be done. And of course, we wish you all the best in the future endeavors, and of course we look forward to receiving your feedback on this meeting and any future meetings. مرة ثانية بحب أتشكركم. بالا, I'd like to thank you as well, and I'd like to thank you Jyoti as well for being with us today and for your time, and appreciate your support and your guidance. And of course, if anybody has any questions, we will make sure to follow up with everyone and share that back with you.
Yeah, thanks to you, Yutaf, and thanks to Abatif.
Thank you.
تفضل استاذ قتيبة، كان عندك مداخلة؟ استاذ قتيبة
أتشكر منك وأتشكر من الزملاء كلهم. الله يحفظك.
طيب.
الله يحفظك. شكرا كثير جميعا. استاذة لينا بنحب نشكرك كمان انت على وجودك معنا، واكيد على المحاضرة اللي اعطيتينا اياها. واحنا يعني اكيد we thank you for your support دائما خلال the organization of such meetings اكيد، واحنا حاضرين لاي any other further meetings ان شاء الله حابين ان احنا نحضر لها. فشكرا كثير جميعا. have a wonderful day وان شاء الله نلتقي قريبا.
باي باي.
يعطيكم العافيه جميعا. مع السلامه.
يعطيكم العافيه.
باي.